First of all, the challenge is that this is a figure for who everybody has something different invested in, so there's always going to be someone who's going to feel as if something was not covered, and that was always that was always the realization. And for me, this was an origin story. I mean, this was about a man and his company, and how at some point the company became the man, right? And so how even when he was set afloat and he was exiled for almost 10 years, how he was not quite whole and had to come back having learned. And so and I wanted to keep it because when you're working in a weird way, working with a limited budget disallows a certain amount, but it also allows you to focus. There's so much to tell, but I really wanted to stay away from anything too personal because that would be total conjecture. He was an extremely private man, and even in the book that was written, I mean, very little is known. I mean, that's a first-person sort of accounting of his own life, which is always a little suspect, but you don't quite get it. And he was an enigma. People who worked with, we interviewed a lot of people, and people who worked with him for 30 years said, I saw him every day, and I don't quite know if he knows if I had a kid or if I was married. I mean, he didn't have those kind of relationships. But I mean, for me, what was interesting was here's this man who we remember as being that brilliant keynote speaker in the mock black turtleneck and the round glasses, totally aware of the cult mentality that was sort of surrounding him and his product on some level. I mean, I always sort of thought as, in investigating and talking to people, it became clear that he understood, for example, that priests wore the black because the church wanted the congregants to sort of only associate them with God, that they were simply channeling in a vessel for God. They didn't want to see them as something earthly. And Steve, at a certain point, I mean, think of the discipline that every time you went outside, you wore black and the same suit. He understood that he didn't want to be associated with Steve. He wanted to only be sort of associated with the product, right? And that's how he showed love, because he also struggled with human relationship in sort of a normal socialized way. Yet, the other thing that struck me when I was first coming on was that same guy who sort of has come to define the keynote speech when he was younger, everybody said he was just very frustrated, had a very hard time explaining things, like the great explainer had a very difficult time explaining because he was telling people things and he had ideas that had not quite been invented yet. There wasn't quite a language for it yet. I always sort of thought it was akin, and I would talk to Ashton about, it's like you have the cure for cancer and it's going to save people's lives, but you don't have the technological sort of verbiage for it. So you're trying to tell people, and there's that scene with the MIT guy, and he says, I just don't get it. Which is a simple human thing to do. You get out. And that was Steve. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the guys in the garage, with the exception of Woz, because he's working for the Sony film, but all those original guys, Espinosa, they said, that exact scene might not have happened, but that scene happened 100 times, in a lot of the film. So, for me, I thought that there was just a great sort of everyman entry into the story. I believe actors are actors. I remember in my second film, I cast Kelsey Grammer as the president, and it was with Costner, who was a film presence, right? And so people are thinking, well, maybe you should do Chris Cooper, but I loved Kelsey Grammer. I didn't care. I didn't have a prejudice for that. So I entered this with that predisposition, meaning I didn't have a sort of preciousness about it. I thought a few things. One, young Steve was a very passionate, intense showman, especially in the time we were telling, which was his early 20s to his late 30s. And I thought Ashton was interesting. I thought that there was something curious about it. So I went to meet him. And first of all, when you meet Ashton, if you've seen any of these interviews, he has like this encyclopedic knowledge of technology. I mean, he knows everything. And not only that, but he deals with people who are creating apps like Uber and Spotify and Airbnb. These are all his. And so those kids that walk into his office to try to have him invest and to try to shepherd them all have one idea that they're obsessed with, and that's all they can talk about. So he kind of got the sense of what obsession was, which I thought was very important. But more than that, he cared. He promised that he would do the work, which he did. He went on a fruitarian diet, which was what Steve was on, and he ended up in the hospital because this quacky diet that Steve Jobs was on for many years really thought grapes were extremely important, and so Ashton's insulin level went up. So he just immersed himself in it, and in that first meeting, it was like a master class in how to take a meeting with a director, because he walked down the stairs and and by the way, this is all, anyone who knew Steve Jobs, he had this loping, weird walk. He had these sort of, his hand gestures were very specific. He was very intense. And he walked in and he was not quite doing it, but he was doing it enough that I kind of thought, okay, this kid's doing Steve Jobs for me. And then 3 hours into the meeting, I kept thinking, gosh, is he doing Steve Jobs or is this Ashton? And by the end of it, I realized he needed me to take away evidence from this meeting. Like, meaning I had to go back and be able to say, oh, I could see him as being Steve. He knew I needed to do that. He's so smart. I mean, really, he's a very smart man. So I drove away, and I was thinking two things. One, I thought, okay, I'm going to catch a lot of initial crap, meaning the second I just say it to anybody, because of the drift that he brings to the party. Secondly, I thought, but you know what? This is a very small film. We have no money to make it. How are we going to compete in a market that are all tentpole studio films? And how are we going to make this interesting? How am I going to think out of the box? And there was something curious. There was a lot of noise that I thought that Ashton playing this made, and I thought if he could pull it off, if he could just be that role, if we could work really hard, and we did, then I think it would be successful. And it's a long way of saying, and by the way, he looked just like him. So that didn't hurt, And because Steve Jobs was an ordinary guy, and he was a guy in the Valley, and he didn't have any of those idiosyncratic things that a lot of really sort of iconic people have. So when an actor plays them, it's the Ronald Reagan thing, or it's the Bill Clinton, whatever you're going to do. He was just a guy. He kind of had a way. He kind of said "I." He spoke slowly. He kind of had a Midwestern father, but he was also from California Valley. He kind of did a lot. He was this. So it was like his idiosyncrasies were very subtle. So in a weird way, when you're an actor, doing small things are actually harder than doing the big things, like if he had some crazy, recognizable draw. So we worked very hard at trying to get those. And a lot of the guys who knew him, I mean, we screened the film for the original Guys in the Garage, which was the original garage that Steve grew up in. And they said, thanks for bringing him back. And, not the Steve that we all know, but the Steve that they knew, and a long way of saying, I think that's what brought me to him. All the guys who were in this movie saw the movie, who were being portrayed, except for Woz, who we had a screening for them. And the guy who plays Chris Espinoza, who was the kid who didn't get the stocks, he saw it twice, and he said, gosh, and he saw it at Sundance. He said, gosh, he felt sort of vindicated in that we had discussed the fact that he didn't get it. He sort of felt like he was now being immortalized, sort of given his due. And he said, in a biopic, you can't get every detail right, because it's like when Sarah Palin saw Game Change and Mayor Candy, and that happened, but it basically happened. All of it happened, but none of it happened exactly that way, of course, because we're simply interpreting it.